Hi, everyone. It's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm excited to tell you that my book is now for sale. It's called Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook. And I'll make sure you have a link in the notes for that. And also, I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and become a member of my YouTube channel. Take care. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. My guest today is Dr. Kayden Vargas, who goes by they, he pronouns. Kayden is a trans non-binary poet, parent, and psychologist who is living, loving, and working in the traditional homelands of the Yakama Nation. They are a first-generation scholar and poet growing up in Brewster, Washington, in a town of about 2,000 people. His first love was, and always will be, the Columbia River. Their poetry revolves around themes of small-town living, bicultural, bilingual, biracial life, trauma healing, and trans identity. Dr. Vargas also works as an assistant professor of psychology at Heritage University, a small not-for-profit university that is both a Hispanic-Serving-Institution and Native American non-tribal serving institution located in Toppenish, Washington. Their clinical specialties include gender-affirming healthcare, eating disorders, religious trauma, and queer psychosocial development. Dr. Vargas will be joining me at the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture online conference this May, speaking on the topic of healing beyond the binary, transgender expansiveness, sexualities, and overcoming religious residue. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say. Welcome. It's so nice to have you, Doctor.
Hi. You can call me Kayden too. That's fine.
Perfect. Great. Yes. This is so nice. It's the first time you and I are actually meeting and getting to talk with each other. And I'm so pleased that you're going to be joining me at the conference too. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's a fun topic. Sure.
Yeah. And so you are in Washington State. I'm in British Columbia. We're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from each other. I would love to know about your growing up and what role, if any, religion played in your life. And if you grew up in a small town, I mean, 2,000 people isn't very big. What was that like for you as well?
Super small. British Columbia, so fun. Before you had to have a passport to cross the border, I did all my dental work in Osuias because it was way cheaper.
Yeah. And it's beautiful.
It's also beautiful, yes. No, I don't even know where to begin. So I grew up in Brewster, which is like an hour north of Wenatchee, probably an hour south of like Tonasket, Oroville kind of area. Mm-hmm. So very agricultural, very Latina. I was raised with my grandparents. So, it's complicated. My mother was adopted, and then my mother passed when I was really young. And then I lived with, or the whole time, I lived with my grandparents as well. So then they took guardianship of us. So grew up with, 70, 80 something year old, wonderful people, but adoptive grandparents in a really tiny town. So when you think about religion, I grew up, it's been quite a journey to where I am now, but grew up evangelical, very like non-denominational, very scrupulous. I was super, super pious and kind of hopped between a few different churches. Like I was in church probably 6 days a week.
Because of your grandparents?
Not even, I mean, my grandparents were, one of my grandmother was religious to the end. My grandpa, not so much until the end of his life, but, so you like, yes and no, right? I think like the evangelical, church, like there's kind of a divide, right? So all of the Latina people were Catholic and all of the white people, for the most part, were evangelical.
Right.
And Brewster's majority Latino now, certainly was for me growing up. And like I grew up working in the fields, all my friends were Latino, but there was that like racial kind of divide with Protestantism and Catholicism. So my grandmother was pretty religious, but in hindsight, I think I was more impacted or like most harmed actually by like the church itself, not even necessarily my grandparents. Like as I got older, I realized like my grandparents, like politics, for example, were pretty moderate in general. Like,
Right.
but it was seen as a good thing. Like, I don't know what your experience was like too, but a lot of mental health things were missed, like scrupulosity and like trauma stuff, because it was like an answer to prayer. We're like, oh, you have this teenager who's like really pious, who's really invested.
Right.
And that's like a good thing.
Right. In the church, we're rewarded for that, for extremism.
Mm-hmm, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I was in hindsight, like I was looking at some old journals. I'm like, that's not normal for like a 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old to all they write about is God. And like they're at church 6 days a week. Like that's not, not the answer to prayer that we think it is. Right. So that was my context. I think the pastors of those churches were much more, like entrenched in purity culture and other things than my grandparents were, I would say. But there were also things that my grandmother bought into, and I think it was really like purity culture stuff in particular that was meant to protect us, in that kind of backwards way. Like I remember her saying when I started dating my now husband, who was my high school sweetheart, that was controversial though. It was like, I'm just trying to protect you. Like they're not going to respect you if you don't like follow these like rules, especially for the women in the church, which is how I was perceived. Completely double standard for my twin brothers. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That is so annoying.
Yeah. So that's the context that I grew up in. I played on, I played music. I was like on the worship team for like 6 years. At least until my senior year of high school, which was the year that my grandpa, he passed away pretty suddenly, like he had cancer. And I'd already lost, my parents at that point. And that was like the moment I think that the strings started to like pull on like deconstruction kind of stuff. And then I went off to a Christian college from there. So I think my childhood was complicated in that there was a lot of trauma. I'm like endlessly grateful for my adoptive grandparents. They were my parents, I miss them. But home is complicated. Religion was complicated. And then from there, it got even like once I left, I think it got even more complicated. In terms of like I went to Whitworth, so I went to a Christian college, and then I like deconstructed and converted to Catholicism. Because I think there were things about Catholicism that I didn't have in the evangelical church that I loved, but then my in-laws are Catholic.
So like the tradition, the liturgy, that sort of thing, it's not all loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
Right.
No like speaking in tongues.
Oh yeah.
No like prophecy stuff.
Oh yeah.
But and then also like I think as a orphan, I guess, like the idea of like the saints and like Mother Mary, like having a mother was really beautiful to me.
Right.
There were pieces of, I had a really wonderful feminist theologian mentor in college, who was my godparent.
Oh, wow.
And then my spouse's family is Catholic. So that made sense at the time. And then later, like within the last year or so, my mom was adopted. So I found out actually that she was Jewish. So that's like that.
Wow.
That's like throwing a wrench into the whole thing, right? Where I was like, excuse me, what? Like,
wow.
Because on my dad's side, we're indigenous. I'm like, so you have this little like white Jewish indigenous like kid who's adopted into like this really Christian context and fit in pretty well. But so in hindsight, there's a lot of things about that are complicated. But when I look back, I think religion was like the answer to trauma for me. Like that was the way that I was going to get out of where I was at. And you mentioned being rewarded for it. Like you're rewarded for it. Like I very much was the golden child and really respected. I think that made it hard when I left. And then over time, like it got more and more distant. And then I went off to grad school and I learned I went to a University of Oregon. So from Town 2000 to Whitworth, which is a Christian college, to U of O for my PhD, which is such a culture shock. But like I learned that like trans people exist for the first time, right? I was pregnant when I learned like what non-binary was. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense for like how I experienced myself. And that was when I think it got really there was religious trauma like growing up, but I don't think I would have called it that when I was in it. It was when I left that I was like, oh, this is like, or like how purity culture has touched everything, or like how gender has touched everything.
Right.
Yeah. And then of course we know like that the right wing got more radicalized also in the last like 15 years. So kind of been watching that process unfold at the same time that I was like figuring out what does spirituality mean for me? Like, I don't know. And it's pretty bad. Like when I came back, when my grandma passed away a couple of years ago, now I had just come out like and had started transitioning. My hair was much shorter. I'm growing it out right now. It's a whole thing. But people didn't recognize me, you know? And so, but then when I told them who I was, like, it was bad. 2,000 people, like, the gossip train was just, like, the worst.
Oh. How did your grandparents take it? Like, were they surprised? Or did they figure something was going on when you were growing up? Or?
Not really, because I, like, you know how gender norms are so rigidly enforced. Like, I played that part. You know, I have really funny pictures now from like Bible quiz of like, you know, the long denim skirts and like the business casual, but like the death grip those had on like, like evangelicals, Orthodox Jews, and conservative Catholics, all of the that like 13 going on 50 kind of energy. I have so many funny photos from that time. So at the time, like, I don't think like they would have known. My grandpa died when I was 17, so that was before I kind of came out in multiple fronts. My grandmother, we didn't really talk about it, but when I came back after my residency year, she was dying, and I'd like cut my hair. I had like a fade, and I think like my picture I has, you know, which I took in her apartment, actually. She didn't ask me about it directly. Like, she noticed it. She asked my sister about it, which I think was kind of how our family worked with, like, purity culture things, was, like, she would tell my sister, and then my sister would tell me. Like, she couldn't talk about sex. She couldn't talk about gender. Like, she wouldn't talk about it directly. So I didn't really get much, but I did hear, like, in the end, my sister like made an attempt to explain to her what it was, and she was like, well, whatever makes her happy, you know. So she softened.
Boy,
I think as she aged, like, she softened, but she also like lost my mother in really tragic circumstances. So I think like for her and religion, it like wasn't worth losing her kids. You know, it was like, I've already lost one in really tragic like circumstances. Like, it's not worth it to like, you're living with your boyfriend in college. Like, it's not worth it for me. Like, I don't like it. Like, but I'm not gonna kill the relationship over this thing. That was kind of her MO by the end.
If only more religious people would choose relationship with their loved ones over the religion factor.
Yeah.
What a difference that would make.
Yeah, it's so interesting too in hindsight too, because I see moments where she like played along, and then there were other moments that she pushed back. So like, I was on the worship team, and that family I was really close to, but it was a cult, you know, that like group that I was a part of was like really extreme. And I remember her every now and then would make comments because she, like, our house was like really conservative in some ways, but also it was a matriarch. She's a matriarch. Our house was run by her, you know. And so she would have moments like where she's like, oh, they just want you barefoot and pregnant in a kitchen. Like, don't, like, no, like, she would like push back against the narrative. She was a badass. She like got her she got her GED at like 78. And then became a pharmacy tech for like my senior year of high school. Like, she was a really, in some ways, a very forward thinker, and then in other ways, like, reinforced kind of what was being said at church. So it was kind of a complicated thing. But I think there's so many, I don't know, if I think about like divorcing religion, I mean, like you said, like, it was rewarded, it was seen as a good thing. And then a lot of, like, as a mental health provider, no, there were so many things that were just like not talked about. So couldn't talk about like abuse that was happening. You know, how it impacted sexuality later was really difficult. Scrupulosity being rewarded just like kept me in an OCD loop for like all of my adolescence. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of the times it's just people doing the best that they can in the systems that they're in. So I also have a lot of empathy for like families who've grown up in like certain traditions, and it's super hard to break out of. Like there are very real consequences for breaking out of it. And I think I saw that when I left. And then when I came back, kind of people's like, oh, people like that were super like influential, like that family that I played music with, they won't talk
Yeah.
to me, right? Like to avoid the appearance of evil, just talking to
Oh,
me
wow.
is like
Yeah, so
appearance of evil.
extreme.
Hmm.
Right.
And you're
Wow.
like, wow, okay. So like it's hard to leave. Like I get that. Um, mhm.
That is just so you went to a Christian college, and then for your PhD you went to University of Oregon. Is that
Mhm.
yes? And then that is like I think of that as being a very blue and
Oh, totally. Yeah.
democratic and
Yeah.
very liberal type of place. So you're kind of thrust into this completely different environment.
Mhm.
And were you with your partner at that time? Did your partner know you were questioning all sorts of things?
Yeah. Well, so I think like the deconstruction threads for both of us started to pull that in high school, right? So like I had lost my pa, and I didn't like the response, like the like, oh, even though he was older and like in his 80s, I wasn't like the Odyssey. I wasn't like accepting the answer for why suffering. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like I'm 17 years old and I've lost three parents. Like this is ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah.
And for him, he lost two siblings, and I won't share too much about his story because that's his to tell. But he lost two siblings really tragically, kind of back to back in different circumstances, um, in Mexico, and the grief really like pulled that deconstruction thread for us. We went to college. It was a Christian college. We both started to ask some questions, but it wasn't quite as overt. So I think we were already like left leaning by the time I left college. I think like I've always had a sense of like tikkun olam, like justice, and like but I just didn't have the language for it. So then when I got to Eugene and started learning the language of like social justice work, it really resonated. So it wasn't like a wake up one day and it was radically different kind of thing. But yeah, my spouse, my husband did. We moved together. I think when it came to sexual orientation stuff, that actually was like a non-issue. Like we just came home one day and we were talking about girls being pretty, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm bisexual." And, he's just like, "Oh, are you attracted to me?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." He's like, "Okay," and that was that. That
That's
was
the
that.
most important thing.
And then gender was much more complicated, because it's like in relationship to other people. Like your gender is, you experience it yourself, but like in a relationship that becomes complicated. That one was a little more um loaded, I think, just because of like patriarchy and Latino culture, like masculinity. But after a couple of years, that kind of mellowed out. I mean, we did a lot of work and a lot of conversations and a lot of like, really, like my gender is just like, I don't like to be put into boxes. um, and I think something I love about Judaism is this idea that Hashem is like, either it can be literal, like guy in the sky, or it can be metaphor, like God can be metaphor for like oneness in the world. And like,
Mhm.
you don't even write the word God down because it's like ineffable, right? Like
Right.
that's how I
Mhm.
feel about my gender. It's like it's ineffable. So
Nice.
like yeah, we moved there and kind of went through our journey. But he always laughs because I like, in some ways I grew up really conservative and was rule following, but that spark was always there, that like non-conforming, and it would sometimes get me in trouble and come up at like the most random of times. But it's always been a part of the process, right? He's like, I'm used to it. I don't know. You just do whatever you want at the end of the day. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Mhm.
Well, when you mentioned about not liking to be put in a box or um, have yourself put in a box, it makes me think of two times in my life when I felt powerful. And one time was when I inherited some money from a very generous relative that wasn't completely expected. And it wasn't even a huge amount of money, but it was more than I had ever had before. So that having some money, which is gone now, by the way, made me feel really bad.
In this economy, like, yeah, I get that.
That's right. Oh, I needed dental work. Okay, you're gone. But then the other was when I first joined Twitter, which I'm not even on anymore. But when I first joined it, I set up one identity as myself with my picture and, used it like I do with emojis and speaking nicely to people and this sort of thing. And the other one, I made an account where I didn't put my face. I just had a different image. And I think that one I just called Divorcing Religion. I didn't go by my name. And I specifically did that because I wanted to experience what it would be like moving through space potentially perceived as a male. So I didn't use any emojis. I didn't hold back on my opinion. I let it rip. If I thought people were being one way or another, or I didn't like something, I just said it, how it was. And the reactions that I got from other people on Twitter, they would say, yeah, man, way to go, brother. Like they were interpreting me in that space as a male. And it was, I experienced a kind of power there in my communication that has been hard to transfer back to like real me in the way that
Real
I
life,
actually am. Yeah. And I just thought that was quite interesting. So yeah, I guess maybe sometimes I don't like being put in a box either. People just making assumptions based on how I look and think that they can treat me a certain way just because.
I mean, it's really interesting because I'm pretty like fluid, I guess, in the way that I present myself too. And so it's really interesting, like when I'm coded one way versus when I'm coded another way, like just how people treat you. Like I remember when I was in a more masculine era, like I could wear whatever I wanted. And I remember I wore, oh god, there's my cat. Hold on. Okay, now I'm going to shut the door. 1 second. We can cut this out and I'll start over. Ugh, silly goose. She's so excited to be an indoor cat again.
Oh, nice.
We just bought this house and we were renting and she couldn't come inside the other place. But it's been really interesting in like when I'm perceived more masculinely, like how the world interacts versus like now when I'm more feminine coded. So I remember one time I was, on campus and I had on I'm not wearing it today. I'm in my like spring era currently, but my baseline gender is like emo kid. So I had on this black t-shirt with my like chains and I have my septum and I have my like chain earrings and all these like kink references, right? But my shirt literally says like switch on it. And I will never forget, I'm more masculine, like I'm binding. One of my colleagues is like, you always look so professional. And I look at them like, what the fuck are you talking? Pardon my language. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, you always look so professional. And I'm like, huh. And then later it hit me. I was like, oh, it's because I'm more masculine and I'm binding and I have a mask on, like they think I'm a man. And I'm literally wearing like something that's meant to be provocative. Like I'm just being silly goose at that point. And it literally says like a kink reference on it. And they're like, oh, you're so professional. And I'm like, is this what like white men do? Is that they can be like provocative and it's fine. Like it's not a big deal. Whereas like, a few years prior in grad school, my hair was to my butt and purple. Like I was policed all the time. Right.
Wow.
For stuff as like non-professional or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, because I'm fluid, like here comes my cat. Just seeing the difference in like how you're perceived. And it's like really strange now, like when I'm having a more feminine moment, when like sexism comes up, and you're like, oh, weird. I'm not even a girl, but I'm still experiencing sexism.
Oh, yeah.
Or like I know a lot of trans men will talk about their experiences of like misogyny as, when they are perceived as women versus like when they pass as men and just like what the difference is there. And then trans women talk a lot about like experiencing sexism and then also trans misogyny. And And it's really, so I think, there's this question of like identity being internal to me. And also part of it is like, I just don't like these systems that like put me in boxes. And then it's like cooking. Like I actually love cooking, but when the expectation growing up in the cult was that like women cooked, I hate it. So I resisted that for a really long time. And now I make challah and I make bread. Like I love baking. And I love cooking and like, but if you expect me to cook, then like forget it. But if it's because I want to do it, then it's a whole different ball game. So I think that's been a big,
I can relate.
Yeah, been a part of the journey is like resisting things and like reclaiming things and then figuring out like what is it I actually like want to do. Which like when you're leaving high control religion is actually like really difficult to figure out, right? Of like what is it that I actually want? And how do I make decisions like on my own and like trust my own judgment,
Yeah. Wow. Hi, everyone. It's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. I want to let you know that the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference has now been changed to an online event. Tickets are much cheaper and it is safer for everyone involved. Please join us. Go to shamelesssexuality.org today to get your ticket. And did you mention also that you have a child?
I do, yes.
And so what's that like? Or I'm imagining the child is quite young because you are pretty young. For me, I'm looking at you thinking you're a young person.
I'm 33,
Yes.
but she is 6. So I had her in grad school around 25, I think is when I had her. 26. That's when I got pregnant. 27 when I gave birth, I think.
So what are those conversations like? Do they even come up yet as far as the way that you present yourself?
Around gender or around
yeah.
It's like
both everything
both come up. Gender actually was not that complicated. Like people make it so complicated when it comes to kids. She was like 3, which is about the age that kids start to recognize like differences in bodies, right? Like different like, oh, like boys have penises. She came home one day, like boys have penises. And I'm like, well, a lot of them, like not all of them. And she's like, oh, okay. And so like I explained it to her, but when she was 3, I just explained it to her. I was like, yeah, like, you know how you were born a girl and you feel like a girl? She's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. Some people are born a girl and don't feel like a girl, or vice versa, or whatever. And so that, like, at 3, that's kind of the language that I gave her. It was like, well, how do you feel in your heart, right? That's your gender. And so then I explained to her, like, I'm neither, like, I'm non-binary. And so we still, like, we're very loosey with, like, pronouns. Because she was starting to talk before I came out. And so, or as I was coming out. So she still will like she, they, me, which is fine. Doesn't actually bother me that much. But as far as knowing that I'm non-binary, like that's really clear. So like she'll correct people. Like I'm a dance mom or whatever. She's a dancer. I don't know how I ended up in that space, but here we are. And when they're like, oh, like, go to the women in your life. She's like, my mom's non-binary. Like, so she learned at like 3. Or so, and it was just very simple. It was like one conversation and she got it. With when she started kindergarten, I think something must have happened. Like she came home one day and was like, I'm embarrassed that you're non-binary. And then she started crying, and she wouldn't talk about it. I think a kid must have said something. So we just had a conversation about it of like, well, that's like what's happening, and she couldn't tell me. And I was like, well, that hurts my feelings, but I have a feeling that that's not about me, actually. That's something probably that happened. And now she's chill about it again. But she'll like correct people all the time when they make assumptions, She's like, oh no, my mom's non-binary. So gender actually was really easy. Religion has been interesting because my family is Catholic. We don't really practice, but some things we do. So like we did baptism, for example, when she was a little bit older, just so that she has a choice about whether to participate in that way or not. When she did the baptism, she was very confused. Because we hadn't been, right? She's like, I don't know what this is. We were just talking though yesterday if she's going to do like first communion. Like, I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah. But when she does occasionally ask questions about God because we're in a very rural, like red county. And so, kids say stuff like one day she came home and she's like, someone said this about like Jesus, and I was like, oh, okay. What I do is kind of like what I do with Santa Claus. I'm just like, what do you think? And then she'll tell me what she thinks. I'm like, that sounds good to me. Or she'll ask me like hard questions. She was 3 when my grandmother died. So she knew she was close with my grandma. So she understands like death. So sometimes she'll ask questions about like what happens. And I'm like, I honestly don't know, man. Like, um, so,
It's pretty honest.
yeah, I'm just honest with her of like,
we
I
don't
don't know.
We have lots of guesses. People make their guesses, but
Yeah.
we don't have anyone reliable yet that has been really, really dead and in the ground and
give
come
us
back
that
and
data,
said,
yeah. Yeah. So I've actually find the religion conversations more difficult than the gender ones right now. I mean, I think that might change as she gets a little bit older and like hears more stuff. But sometimes kids will say the most beautiful stuff too. Like one time she's like, is God real? I was like, I don't know. And we were looking at like a sunset, and she's like, well, or do you think God made the world? And I was like, I don't know, something did. And she was just like, oh, like I think the sunset is all these colors. I think God's bored and just like coloring right now. And you're like, that's kind of beautiful. Like God's coloring the sky tonight. Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get out books from the library or have them in your house or whatever from different traditions, different religious beliefs around the world, as far as or mythology, here's what this group thought about how the world came to be. Here's what they call God. Here's what these people think happens when you die. Like, just to give her a really broad exposure to different ideas, instead of, because all she's going to hear reinforced over and over again is God, Jesus, Mary, God, Jesus, Mary. Just being surrounded by people who are really, they're kind of entrenched in that a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's really something I'm still figuring out like what Judaism means to me. So I'm taking a Judaism class with the Anya Shiva. So if you have any Jewish listeners, that's actually a really wonderful resource that looks at Jewishness from like an unbound place, like a liberatory place. So it's really, really beautiful for the deconstruction like folks too. But that's the only way that's the only way I can approach religion, I think, is from this like liberatory kind of lens. So I'm still trying to figure out what that will mean for me. It was a lot of the like Christian side of my family were very weird about it. They were like, oh, cool. Kind of like, oh, that's a cool fact to know about yourself. And I'm like, that's kind of a fundamental difference. I guess it's kind of fundamentally life-changing actually to know that. And so I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to pass that on to Anya. So like in Jewish law, it's passed down through a matriarch, right? So if my mother was Jewish, I'm Jewish, which means Anya, my kiddo, is Jewish. And so I still try to figure out, like, I'll talk to her about it a little bit, or like I taught her how to braid challah the other day.
Yeah.
Or like we made manstanshin, like cookies. So like cooking is a way that I'm connecting her. But as she gets older, I love the idea of like integrating lots of examples, because like the bigotry, even if we're like a religion neutral like household, it still shows up. Like I remember last Christmas she said something like, I think one of her friends was like Jehovah's Witness or something, I don't know. They don't celebrate Christmas or whatever, which is fine. But she was like, the language that she used, she was like, well, why do they hate Christmas? And I was like, oh, girly pop, they don't hate Christmas. Like, this is it started out as a religious like holiday. Like, not everyone, practices the same like religion and has the same holidays. It doesn't mean that they hate Christmas. It just means that like they don't celebrate Christmas, right? I gave her like the example from like Ramadan. I'm like, we're not Muslim, so like we don't hate Ramadan,
Right.
And she just was like, oh, okay. Or like, she's half Mexican. I'm like, we celebrate Day of the Dead in our house, but not everyone does, right? That doesn't mean they hate Day of the Dead.
Right.
And so she was just
what a good way to put it. Yeah. That was really
where did you get that from? This idea, right? Dang, the Christians always feeling persecuted. You're already like getting it.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like in your home there's a real mix. You're taking things that you think will add to your life, add to her experiences and your experiences, and enjoying incorporating those into your
Hmm.
life.
Yeah,
Rather
keep
than
my peace.
feeling bound, like when you talk about previously being in the cult, and scrupulosity was at play, and it was such a part of your identity, and I can totally relate to that. That's exactly how I was too.
Mhm.
Is that a struggle for you? Like for me, I I really have to work sometimes to find the middle, and it's very easy for me to go to extremes. And that's, I think, part of the way I was raised, and part of I was rewarded for that as well in the church
Mhm.
situation. Um, but it's also just how I tend to be. So really searching for the middle on things can be very
Yeah.
hard. What's it like for you?
I mean, same. I think I'm also neurodivergent, so sometimes special interests kind of stack up, but like I have had to be really intentional, like as I've explored like Judaism. Thankfully, my therapist is also Jewish, so that's been helpful. But to be like, okay, like I'm never gonna be kosher because like I love carnitas and like mariscos. They're like two staples in our diet. But like so I really, yeah, be really careful to not like just I'm not gonna replace one high control version of
Yes.
Christianity for another high, like, and that's kind
Yeah.
of what happened for me when I entered Catholicism. Like I lived in a
Right.
women's house. It was very extreme. So it just kind of replace like one set of like high control tactics like with another. That was in the end not really healthy for me. So for a long time I just stepped away entirely, right? Like almost all of my grad school experience, like I just completely wasn't. I would describe my um religion at the time as like failed atheist, so like pretty agnostic. Like tried to be atheist, like couldn't quite do that because I'm still pretty spiritual. And now finally, like however many years later, 15 years later, I'm able to approach like these different. I love this saying. It was like my home was in Christianity, but I have cottages everywhere. I wouldn't say that my home is in Christianity anymore, but like approaching religion from a more moderate place of like, oh, well, like I've been really into like the spirit of something or like the ethic of something. So like something I love about Judaism is like it's not a creed religion, it's a deed religion. So it's like what do you
Mm.
do and like what is this ethic and then how do you live that like ethic in your life? At least for less orthodox like
Like
folks.
more reform?
More reform, yeah. I mean, I would say even more left than most reform, but I love the flexibility in that. But so lately, it's been really beautiful. But I do also have a tendency to um, do things in extremes. But that's gotten better. I think the farther away I've gotten from the cult, and then I think after my grandma died, I just quit trying to like build relationship with those people, and it became much easier to just be like, okay, well, like here's what I love. And like, yes, I am actually quite a spiritual person. Like I'm teaching religion and spirituality this semester. And we're teaching sacred reading strategies across the Abrahamic traditions and then applying them to indigenous text, like secular texts and indigenous texts. And that's just been like the most beautiful thing. So like those are things like finding non-traditional ways have helped me not fall into like the rigidity of like of the cult.
Yeah, there's that word, rigidity. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I was thinking about for myself, but also some of the things that you're describing that you've had to work through.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and in some ways it makes sense. Like, I have major beef with like original sin theology. But like, if you think you're inherently bad and you have trauma or you have OCD or you have like these other kind of contextual factors, like that is just a nightmare. That's just a recipe for like one, entering a cult, two, staying there and like staying really sick and not knowing it. I have built some really beautiful relationships. So I have some priest friends and clergy who I have a little bit of hope. I think it's slow moving, but I do have a gaggle, I guess, of clergy who will call, like if they have a parishioner or a church member, congregant who they're like worried about, right? Or they're like, this doesn't seem normal, they call. And so I'm really grateful because I'm like, cool, like if we can like train the next gen of spiritual leaders, like
Right.
here's a
Right.
difference between like a healthy spirituality and one that's not.
Because it seems like it can cross over into delusion without too much trouble. But people really, really hesitate to use that word for it because religion does remain one of the last sacred cows. And so people, if a person is disheveled and standing on the street corner yelling at God, in Canada, they're going to be gently invited or not gently invited to the psychiatric ward in the hospital. But if they're dressed well, maybe on a soapbox, and they're yelling and waving a Bible, and they're white, of course. They're just going to be left alone. So it's the different standards there.
Yeah. And then people wonder, like, the cults that hit the news, like when they end in flames, you're like, how do we get there? When I teach diagnosis and assessment too, it's so complicated because like we talk about the role of religion and like the global majority of the world, like believe in something. And also, you're like, is it religious? Is it delusional? Is it psychosis? Is it both? How do you figure it out? Like, what is appropriate within a given context? So I always give the example of like the Beatles song, Let It Be. If that was real life, someone saying Mother Mary talks to me, if they're Catholic, is that psychosis? And they're usually like, well, no, because I have a pretty Catholic like group there. And like, well, if they're Jewish and they Mother Mary talks to them, like, what about that? But I think within Christianity, it can be really, especially Christianity, but any extremist version of religion, I guess, like not wanting to pathologize like spiritual experiences and like being open to the woo-woo, I guess, if you will. But where does psychosis come into play? Like that's where a lot of religion gets really scary, is when you have like a very charismatic person who thinks they're hearing from God. And
yeah. And it can certainly be horrifying or deadly if there are command hallucinations involved and they kind of have roots in biblical teachings. So yeah, it feels murky. It's a difficult place to be in. If I may ask about some more purity culture stuff. So you grew up your grandparents were more liberal, say, than some folks, or more moderate than some folks, but you were involved in a group that was more conservative, it sounds like. What did that mean for you as far as sex and sexuality and all those things?
Yeah, I mean, all of the stereotypes of like the ex-evangelical movement, right? I mean, like the purity ring, the like pledges, it was really hard. And people didn't know this because like negative emotions weren't allowed, I guess. And adoption is like one of the only traumas that like you're supposed to be grateful for. But I endured like pretty significant severe sexual assault with my bio dad after my mom died. For a short period when he was trying to gain custody, and then periodically when he'd come to visit after that. And their sex was so off limits, and that like I was like 5 when it started, 5 or 6. That I didn't know what was happening because there just wasn't a language around like body parts or whatever until I was like getting in trouble for reenactments. And then I learned really quick that wasn't appropriate. And then I felt like when I was about 12, I had a situationship, I guess, which in hindsight was like my first queer like kind of relationship. And then at the same time was getting all these messages like in youth group and stuff about like LGBTQ people being terrible, that sex was awful. So all of that kind of coalesced. Like when I learned what sex was and then heard the way the church talked about it, it was like, oh, well, then like I am inherently awful and this is terrible. So I'm going to deep dive into what I'm supposed to do. Right? And so really deep dove into purity culture, all the things like I Kiss Dating Goodbye, all of those books, all of the purity pledges, all of the things. So there's kind of 2 sides to it. One was like trying to compensate for abuse that absolutely wasn't my fault, but didn't have language for. You add that to like being called a chewed up piece of gum or whatever, that was terrible. And then there was also like the queer stuff where like, as I was entering puberty, like was experiencing very normal and engaging in very normal, like queer, like sexual explorations with friends that we didn't know what it was though. Like we didn't know what we were doing really until we did. And then I was like, whoa. So then I pivoted super hard to the right wing, probably around like 12 or 13. So all of that stuff was super reinforced, like in youth group, and tried to dress modestly, would occasionally get talking to if I wore something that wasn't quite modest enough, by like church leaders, which in hindsight is really creepy. So I'm like, okay, I'm like 15 and you're you're telling me not to tempt the men. Just very classic kind of and I think that was a piece that my grandmother really wasn't moderate about. And I think a lot of that was fear-based for her and wanted me to be respected. I think that was kind of her narrative, but she absolutely endorsed for the women anyway, the purity culture shenanigans, which that was what we fought about the most. Like after my grandpa died and I started dating my now husband, like God forbid I park my car at his house and stay the night,
Oh, yeah.
But like we couldn't talk about sex. So like I remember being in college. It was like my sophomore year of college. I'd been with my spouse for like 3 years at that point. My sister finally comes to me and was like, my grandma says I need to talk to you about birth control. And I was like, I've been on birth control since I was 15. I had to figure it out on my own. And she's like, okay. I'm like, okay, that's good. So yeah, it was deeply entrenched, and it made sexuality later, like when you add trauma to that, like really difficult. Like when I had my breakdown in college, I had to go to treatment for an eating disorder. A lot of it was because sex stuff was super triggering, and I didn't have a language to like describe that. Or how to communicate well with like my partner about that. And so, figured it out. Now though, like, especially coming out, and I'm excited for that. I won't spoil too much, but I'm excited to talk about gender and sexuality at the conference. Now sexuality is like a staple to my coping, like not in a bad way, but like in a, like, I feel alive and I have a body and like I get to have ownership over it. And that's like a really beautiful. I've learned like in Reformed traditions, for example, like sex on Shabbat is a mitzvah, right? Like kind of looking at sexuality as holy and as like a gift. I've gotten there, but it's taken a really long time, like dismantling. It's always so hard. I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you have a conservative moral like ethic for sexuality, like that's fine. But also that flip doesn't just switch the minute you sign a piece of paper either, right?
Right. Yeah.
And just normalizing, like I teach gender and sexuality too, like the amount of my students who can't like label a diagram of a vagina is just like really sad to me. And they're adults, I can make them do that. But yeah, so I think it impacted everything, right? Like it kept abuse like in the closet. I wasn't able to talk about that until I was older, until I was in college. It meant sex ed was kind of on your own. And you were Googling it, which leads to porn, which may or may not be great. And then you don't have anyone to talk about like what's happening because you're just told like it's not supposed to happen.
Right. Oh boy. It's so, and I feel like this does relate to at least Christianity, where I've come from. It's such a happily ever after fantasy fairy tale. And if you just do all these things and say these magic words, everything will be perfect. But that's not reality. And I mean, so I developed very early. I started menstruating at 10 years old. So my body was changing before I had like the emotional and psychological maturity kind of to figure out what's going on and what it meant. And I just felt awkward and I looked different than my peers, these sorts of things. And then suddenly getting lots of attention from boys and older men even. And I'm a child basically. And then religion disconnecting us, purity culture disconnecting us from these natural things that are going on in our body and the questions and the curiosity that we have. Curiosity is wonderful. I mean, it's something to be lauded, but in fundamentalist homes, it has to get stamped out right away in favor of obedience. And parents think that they are protecting their children by doing those things. But it makes such a mess. It makes things such a mess. And then you do get married, and like you say, that you're supposed to switch, flip the switch, and everything's supposed to be wonderful. But it's not like that for everybody. There can be a lot of baggage involved there. And I imagine even layers and layers more stuff for people in the queer community, and people who are trans. And I look at what's happening in your country right now, and I'm mortified because trans people, non-binary people, with the passport restrictions and all these weirdness, these things that the government is doing right now, it just makes things extra hard. Being human is hard enough. Being alive, growing up, getting through this world day by day is hard enough. We don't also need to be harassed.
Like a fascist government on top of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really I feel very fortunate because a lot of people will deconstruct in their relationships and then end up not working, or they'll leave cults or whatever. And in some ways, my spouse and I have always, we just kind of went on the journey together, and we're committed to each other. And that means sometimes we change too, and that's been okay. So I'm very grateful on the sexual purity front. We kind of grew up together, and so, but from the very beginning, kind of made a commitment, which I didn't realize how feminist this was at the time, but it was made a commitment to I'm going to enjoy this, but so are you, and so we're going to be committed to figuring out what that looks like together. And so I've got really lucky, I'm pleasure gap, don't know her. But because I just got lucky, but the systems don't prepare people to have liberated conversations around sexuality, or healthy conversations around sexuality. I just got kind of lucky that I have a husband so we've always been kind of just in it together.
Nice.
But it does a huge disservice to everyone if they do engage in sexuality later. But yeah, it impacted everything, and my relationship to it is so different now, and I'm very grateful for it, but it takes a while to unlearn all of that.
Look at the opportunities you have now to raise your own child or children, if you have more, in a place where sex is beautiful and healthy, and it's just a normal part of life. It's sexuality comprises one piece of the pie. It's not the whole pie. There's so much else going on in life as well. But we get to really enjoy that piece of the pie. Put whipped cream on it. Just have a great time.
Sometimes literally. No, I love the body as a birthright. I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting. My kiddo is 6 now. And my experience at her age was abuse ridden. So I actually don't really have context for what normal would look like, but it'll be really interesting to see how that feels when it comes up, but my hope is that I'll be able to instill just safety, here are ways that you can express sexuality that are safe for you. While also
autonomy and agency.
And just normalizing. I think it'll be a challenge too. I think those triggers come up for sure. But so far it's been pretty good. I do my best. She understands consent, right? And we have lots of conversations about bodies. I mean, it's similar to gender. I think people freak out, at least in the United States, they freak out about sex ed. And you're okay, sex ed with a kindergartner is not talking about explicit. It's talking about you don't you have to ask permission to touch other people's bodies, and they have to ask permission to touch yours, and just consent stuff. But it's been good. I've also been healing along with her too, as I give her a childhood that I didn't get at kind of each year,
I love it. Yeah, and just de-shamifying, the opportunity to raise a child in an environment where they do not get shamed for having questions or for being who they are, and just being able to use things as learning and teaching opportunities, rather than having this morality like an anchor heavily attached to everything that goes on. I think that's so powerful. for us to have moved beyond that. And so I'm excited for you. I'm excited for your child. I do want to also let people know, any folks who are listening, so you can get your ticket for Shameless Sexuality, where Kayden, Dr. Vargas, is going to be speaking. Go to shamelesssexuality.org. It's an online conference. I was going to hold it in Seattle, but due to political reasons and other things going on in the United States right now, I decided to hold it online, safer for everybody. Tickets are even cheaper, only $99 and $50. And it's going to be really exciting. And also, I don't even know if you know this, Kayden, people can go to the Divorcing Religion YouTube channel, and that's where I have sessions posted from my last Shameless Sexuality conference.
Oh, cool.
Incredible speakers there, and these are free resources, great for people who are clinicians or for people recovering from purity culture indoctrination. So please go to my YouTube channel and avail yourself of those videos. There are some really great ones, and we'll be adding to them soon because you're going to be speaking, and Dr. Daryl Ray and some other really exciting folks who will be joining us online for this event in May.
That's cool. I'm looking forward to it. Bummed about
Me
in
too.
person, but I get it.
I know.
I was like, yeah. That's fair.
Yeah, I really wanted it to be in person because I haven't been able to hold an in-person event yet. But I was just too concerned about people, Canadians, my event staff and myself trying to cross the border. I didn't want to risk being detained. They told us we couldn't take our phones. We would have to take burner phones. We shouldn't take our laptops. And that you can't really run an in-person conference without having cell phone, laptop,
it's always
to be in touch with everybody.
It's always enlightening to hear how other people in different countries see what's happening here. Good. Those of us on the left are we're like, yeah, this is fucking fascism. But then, to hear oh, okay, Canadians are scared to bring their phones across the border. You're like, that's valid. Yeah, thank you. That's validating.
Oh, yeah. Lawyers have been telling us, immigration lawyers have been telling, if you're going to be crossing the border and going to the United States, do not take your phone. You're not safe because some border guards will go through social media or the internet, look for, and I'm all over the internet about being not a fan of religion and a huge fan of sexuality. So I think some very conservative border guards might just have a problem with that. Well, this has been so interesting. How can people find you? So I know that you're working as a professor. Do you also have a clientele that you work with?
I do. Right now, mostly I'm focusing on gender affirming care kind of letter assessment stuff right now.
Beautiful.
I'm kind of taking a break from my long-term clinical work at the moment, but I do those letters and I'll do them for free. I can send over my website, but it's bccdrkmv.com. That's an easy way for folks to get a hold of me. I also do a lot of trainings and stuff. So if folks, right now, a lot in healthcare. I did one with chaplains the other day. That was kind of fun. But I do a lot of stuff on LGBTQ kind of mental health and the intersections with religious trauma and eating disorders, gender affirming care. That kind of stuff is kind of right up my alley. So my website's an easy way. I'm not really professionally on social media at the moment. I'm also a poet though. So if you Google me, you'll find poetry.
Hey.
Read at your own discretion, I guess. It can sometimes be spicy, but depending on what they're looking for, I think my website is an easy way to kind of find me.
Nice. Well, I hope I can have you back sometime because I would also love to explore a little more the crossover between purity culture and disordered eating that can arise a lot of the time to do with consent and control and other issues. I think that would be very interesting and helpful for a lot of people. But for now, we're out of time. So thank you for joining me. And I'm looking forward to talking with you again just in a month or so from now at the conference. Thanks, Kayden.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Remember to go to shamelesssexuality.org to get your ticket for the upcoming conference. And we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.